When Maya said those words, soft, scornful, and delivered like a verdict, something in me folded up and closed. A secure husband would understand, she said, as if my steady paycheck and predictable kindness were chains binding her to boredom. She said it with the same clinical pity she used when I fretted over savings or gently pushed back on her impulsive plans. You're just too secure, Ethan. Liam gets me. He understands brokenness. Liam. The name came with a soundtrack in Maya's head. Late-night confessions, coffee-stained vulnerability, poetic selfies with captions like, healing in progress. He was her ex from college, the one who had supposedly fallen apart when their relationship ended. Depressed, directionless, renting a shabby apartment, playing guitar for spare change. In Maya's retelling, Liam was raw and honest while I was convenient and safe. She romanticized his scars and treated my stability like an insult. I told myself to be reasonable. I tried to have the conversation. Calm, careful, the way you talk about money or a leaking roof. If you miss him, talk to him. Tell me what you need. We can figure this. She laughed, the kind of laugh that ends marriages. Ethan, I don't need lectures about budgets. I need someone who sees the pieces of me that are messy and beautiful. Liam saw that. So she left. She didn't slam the door or shout. She kissed our son on the forehead, packed a suitcase, and drove away with a goodbye that sounded suspiciously like relief. She moved into Liam's place, the poetic, broken nest she'd always idealized. She was glowing in photographs for a week. Finally, her friends commented, wine glasses raised in pixels. She deserves someone who understands. I didn't call her hysterically. I didn't scream. I did what I'd always done when life required thought. I collected facts. The first thing I did was simple and practical. I checked the accounts. Not to be petty, but because years of shared bills make you acutely aware of what's possible and what's fantasy. It didn't add up. Maya's pay stubs had been consistent. Liam's social media persona of poor artist struggling didn't match the wire transfers I found going into his account. Small, regular deposits from an unfamiliar company, payments that looked like someone laundering a reputation rather than supporting a struggling songwriter. Then I started asking around. Not in gossiping fashion. I ran into old classmates, checked public business filings, scanned local forums. Little inconsistencies stuck out. A promotion at a small consulting firm that didn't show up on LinkedIn, a leased car he never mentioned, a pattern of short-lived woes that coincided suspiciously with someone else's generosity. The more I dug, the less broken Liam looked and the more predatory his sad boy act seemed. But evidence alone is a cold weapon. I needed context. I needed to understand how Maya had fallen for the performance. So I read their message threads. I won't pretend it wasn't a violation, because it was, and I paid for that in long nights of shame, and watched how the narrative was built. Vulnerability with a purpose, strategic self-deprecation. Stories of hardship told just long enough to earn sympathy before pivoting to expensive dinners and extravagant gifts courtesy of benefactors who asked nothing and received everything. Liam's brokenness had been the perfect cover for a man who liked attention, who liked being fixed, and who profited from being perceived as wounded. What hurt was not that he'd lied. People lie. What hurt was that Maya had chosen the lie because it felt more fashionable than the truth. I could have exposed him publicly, call the friends, send screenshots to everyone who'd liked their photos, launch a social media takedown. But revenge like that is messy. It turns you into someone you won't recognize. Instead, I decided on a surgical reveal. Something that would show Maya the ledger behind the poetry without humiliating her more than she'd already humiliated me. There was a charity launch gala coming up, the kind of event Maya loved. She'd been excited to bring Liam to see how good he could be in front of her old crowd. She wanted him validated in the very circles she used to roll her eyes at me for attending. The night of the gala, I showed up because I knew how much she loved being seen. Liam arrived in a tailored jacket and an easy grin. He played the salvaged soul perfectly, vamping between humility and magnetic charm. Maya glowed beside him, like moth to a flame she told herself was warm. I waited until dessert, when the room hummed with conversation and cameras. I had arranged a small video presentation with a friend at the foundation, a discreet, in honor of reel that would air before the keynote. What flashed on the screen was not the usual montage of smiling faces. Instead, we ran a simple, factual thread, bank transfer timestamps, public filings showing Liam's consultancy income, photos of the leased car in his name, screenshots from a business profile that contradicted his unemployed artist image. Not a smear, just documents laid side by side with the headlines he'd fed Maya for weeks. The room went quiet in that peculiar way only social rooms know, the hush that follows a glass shattering. I watched Maya's face change from rapture to confusion to the slow crimson of betrayal. Liam's smile tightened like a bowstring. He tried to laugh it off, to charm the audience into disbelief, but the receipts were there, undeniable and bland as paper. Maya stood, shaky, and I saw the exhaustion that had haunted our marriage years ago flare back. The recognition that she'd been performing a narrative as much as he had. "Ethan," she whispered across the room, a plea and an accusation. I felt nothing theatrical. I felt tired. "I showed you what you asked for," I replied quietly. "You wanted to know his brokenness. I showed you how broken he really is, not in spirit, but in honesty." After the gala, the fallout was slow and corrosive. Liam's benefactors quietly backed away when their names were attached to contractual obligations. His supposed struggles, that had summoned sympathy, now summoned questions about intent. The car lease was repossessed. A small business he'd touted as an incubator was revealed to be a vanity LLC with no income. People who had donated and advised began asking for audits. Maya called me for days. She cried, she blamed, she accused me of shaming her. She said I had humiliated her in front of friends, that I'd played a vindictive game. She was right about one thing. I had chosen a method that hurt. But I had also chosen a method that spared ruin from becoming an unsolved puzzle. The truth, finally visible, allowed people who had been manipulated to step back before they were used further. In the quiet that followed, when Liam's call slowed and Maya took time away to think, I realized the more complex truth. She hadn't fallen for a man's brokenness so much as for the idea of being the one who fixed someone. It was a posture of meaning-making. She wanted to believe she could make a story of trauma into a story of salvation. It made her feel important. It made her feel needed. I can't make her stop wanting that. I can't make her stop finding meaning in other people's fracture. What I could do was refuse to be complicit in a narrative built on deception. That, and protect our son from a performance that might have taught him that instability is a romantic accessory. She moved back months later. Not because she had chosen to, but because the illusion unraveled, and with it the parties and the easy validation. We talked, painfully and honestly, in ways we never had when she still loved the idea of rescuing someone else. She apologized, not as an attempt to win me back, but as a genuine owning of how blind she'd been. I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. Forgiveness, I learned, is less about absolution and more about choosing a path that lets you sleep at night. Liam? He drifted, eventually, into a life with fewer followers and more consequences. His brokenness remained, but without the spotlight it had been weaponized into. It was just a mess he had to clean up himself. Maya told me once, months after the gala, "You could have crushed him." She was speaking of the man who'd used her, the romantic sonnet turned ledger. Why didn't you? I thought of the quietness I felt in the room when the facts rolled on the screen. A stillness not of triumph, but of an end. Because I wanted her to see, I said. Not to destroy. To choose. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in years I felt seen not as secure or boring, but as someone who'd loved in ways she'd mistaken for weakness. She reached for my hand, tentative like testing ice. Whatever comes next, whether we stay together or walk away from what we were, isn't a victory. It isn't even a story I want to write as revenge. It's simply the consequence of honesty. Sometimes, to show someone the truth, you have to give them the thing they asked for and watch whether they can handle it. She said once, between regret and gratitude, "A secure husband would understand." I smiled then, tiny and weary. "I understand," I said. "But I also know when something is built on a lie." And this time, when she looked at Liam's ruined facade and finally understood what broken had been doing to her, she had the choice: stay with illusion, or step back into a life where steadiness wasn't a cage but a foundation.